Ladies and gentlemen, the latest episode of the Door Unhinged podcast. Today I am joined by a champion on Twitter, a person who explains to the common people the complicated language of law firms and the like, all those complicated terms of service stuff we skip. He's in the trenches making sure we understand things, that we have consumer rights and all of that. He's been a sponsor for Easy Allies, which I love. Mr. Hoeg Law. That's his full name, Hoeg Law. Thank you, sir.
That's right. I go by Hoeg Law. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you can call me Rick. Absolutely. Thank you for the wonderful intro, and thank you for having me here.
Oh yeah, no problem. And I try to get all the compliments out of the way at first, because then when I play it back, I'm like, man, I'm just riding the guest dick this whole time. This feels like
sure.
Oh man, Kyle leaving though. That's the Easy Allies. I'm not sure if you heard about that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I've been following that. I've been, I don't chat with them all the time, but I've had the good fortune of being able to interact with, I think 7 out of 9 of the Easy Allies since I started sponsoring them. Now, I think that's 3.5 years ago, which unfortunately got essentially ended by them going with the higher level sponsors. So now you can hear Brandon talking about all sorts of grooming apparel and whatnot. Yeah, have you not checked in a little bit?
I check in every now and again. I know the sponsors change rapidly, though. So both Kyle and Rick are gone.
That's right. That's right. No, they canceled everybody. They ended the Patreon sponsorship tier. So they went with a commercial firm that does, I think, like red and blue. I'm forgetting the name of it, but they help place ads. And so I went and contacted them and said, hey, I've been a long-time sponsor of Easy Allies. What are your rates? What are you looking at? And good for them, but it's completely out of my budget for sponsoring the show anymore.
Yeah, for real. I like the thing I like about Easy Allies is they just seem jolly. They don't seem scared because remember when I feel like we're in this culture where people can't upload stuff without being scared now. We're always scared of DMC takedowns and stuff. Did you see that? Sony just accidentally DMCA'd their own post about The Last of Us 2 on their Twitter.
I did. And, I did this 10-part series about their DMCA takedowns. The one thing I would say about that is if you've dived into the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and you know how toothless the penalties are for essentially lying about a takedown, which Sony has used to their benefit in various places on the net, one thing I will say on that kind of score is somebody could easily just say they're Sony and hit Twitter to take something down of theirs. Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it. You are risking that penalty could be imposed upon you, but it's so difficult, and it really is so toothless. It wouldn't surprise me if some guy on some VPN said, oh yeah, I'm Muso, Limited TNT, or I'm Sony, and you got to take this down. And Twitter said, yep, we don't ask any questions. And that's what happened.
It's not innocent until proven guilty. What it should be is, okay, you have verified that you are Sony. You have verified that this is an actual infringement on copyright, so now we'll take it down. But what happens a lot of times is like, okay, we'll take it down until we find out the right outcome.
Right, and that's the important thing to understand about how the DMCA operates. I think people get that confused, and you said very nicely in your intro of me that this is the kind of thing that I like to talk about. This is, hopefully I help break it down for folks that don't necessarily want to dive into 10 or 15 pages of statute. But the DMCA doesn't impose liability. It's not that kind of law. What it does is it says that Twitter can't be sued for contributing to the infringement of someone else's copyright if when they get one of these notices that matches all the things that the statute says, they immediately take it down. So Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Steam and anyone else have all these policies in their terms of service where they respond to a takedown that meets the criteria that is set forth in the DMCA by just saying, hey, we don't want any liability. This isn't our fight. We're taking it down. Unless, of course, the party that's being attacked is really, really big. Right? If it's something that's lucrative to that platform, they maybe look at it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing is once you get too much sway, you just find yourself above the rules so many times. And you have, it would be one thing if like Twitter was this small thing, but it's become so big. So any changes to their terms of use, it shouldn't be viewed through the lens of, oh, it's Twitter. It's their platform. They can do what they want. It's like there are so many people whose livelihoods and their influence is dependent on Twitter that Twitter should have this, in my opinion, higher responsibility to confirm the accuracy of these DMCA takedowns and stuff like that. The same goes for YouTube, for Facebook, any of them, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think that's the debate, right? So
Yeah.
to me, I'm a corporate lawyer, right? That's the tilt that I have to tell people. Like, I represent companies. That's what I do. I draft contracts. I help companies get formed. If one of my companies became Twitter, that would be a great day for me and for them. Yeah. But just in general, I look at this and say, well, Twitter is a private platform. They should be allowed to do what they want with that platform, take things down, comment on them, do whatever they want. I was actually just tweeting about they apparently flagged one of the latest presidential tweets as essentially false, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I saw that.
That adds some liability for them that is that's not necessarily what I would counsel, regardless of how you feel about the president. I'd say, that's an interesting step, Twitter. But I look at it and say they should have those abilities, but where you're right and where everybody that comes in and says, hey, Rick, cover these kinds of things, I think is also right, is the DMCA, and I've said this in my channel, might well be a good idea. I think it's useful to allow these platforms to exist without worrying about what Joe in Poughkeepsie puts up there and is potentially infringing, but it's clearly aligned wrongly. As you say, they don't have to go through any of those steps. They just take it down, and that's really kind of the cost-benefit analysis that makes sense for them in 99% of the cases. And I can't fault them for following what the law says is what makes the most sense. What I can fault is that the law then is wrong. That's not the way it should be. There should be some kind of step that says, okay, you have to get credible information that this guy is Sony. You have to get credible information. Hey, Twitter, when Sony asks you to pull a tweet that is just words and is not a quote as copyright infringement of The Last of Us Part 2, maybe you go, hey, that's just words. Maybe you should have a thing in your algorithm that says, hey, there wasn't a picture here, there wasn't a video here. We need to really look at that. Is that a quote? What is that? Because that's the kind of thing where I look at it. The reason I covered it in my series at all is I was flagged by a couple of folks that said, hey, this guy over here at a channel called, I think, Geeks and Gamers, didn't use any of the materials. Yeah, he was critical of it, but he was just talking about the narrative elements that were leaked. And I said, oh, that's a significant, that's not just a gray area. So much of intellectual property is gray area. If that is in fact the case, as I said in my video, that's the kind of thing where I say, oh no, that's actually pretty verging on abusive. And the same for kind of taking down just words on a tweet. And so I look at it a little bit differently than you just described, which is I think these platforms, even as important as they are, need to have the kind of ability to do what they want, because I want to have the next platform be created. I want to have everybody incentivized to do that and not just be taken over by, onerous regulations or what have you. But at the same time, the current regulations that they have, the laws that they currently are looking at, clearly aren't balanced correctly. Clearly.
Yeah, and I have no idea how they would go about it. It's so giant. I'm not a Twitter employee. I don't know how one would set out to do those things, but yeah, it's definitely an expectation, because it can't. It's silencing language at this point on Sony's part. It's not silencing footage. It's if you so much as touch this issue with the tip of your finger ever so lightly, you are caught in the crossfire. It's terrible.
And that's what they want to do, right? So they're using the system, and this is what upsets me, right? A lot of people come into my channel and say I'm a corporate shill because I talk about terms of service. I just did a big thing on Ubisoft's terms of service and explained to people that it wasn't the end of the world that you might have seen elsewhere on YouTube or on Twitter. And people come in and say, how much is Ubisoft paying you and all this stuff? And I said, well, $0. But what's funny about that is what gets me really mad is when a corporation like Sony just vaults over the line. Like, I've got people in my client book that are trying to protect, and I apologize for that, that are trying to protect their own copyright, their own copyrighted materials. And they have to use these things, these mechanisms, like a DMCA takedown notice, judiciously. And they're trying to do it in good faith and protect what they have. And a company like Sony doing this kind of thing makes it harder for those people. And that pisses me off. That makes me upset. If you're not a regular visitor to Virtual Legality, in general, I think people usually compliment me on my neutrality and trying to just kind of explain how things work. And the Sony series about this topic, I think, is one of the series that has seen me at my most heated, because it makes me upset at a kind of fundamental level that you don't need to do this, Sony. It sucks that your stuff was stolen. I'm right there with you. I'm very sorry for you. I hope you clear up that security issue. Right. But it's out. It's gone. You don't do this. You don't spin around on everybody else that's commenting on your stuff, even if they don't like it. And I don't have to back up the people that are putting this stuff out there. A lot of people come into my channel and say, Rick, are you in favor of these reactionaries or what they're saying about these? The content of their commentary doesn't matter to me. I haven't actually spoiled myself on The Last of Us Part 2. I haven't looked at the material of those leaks, although I think obliquely a lot of that information kind of comes out into Twitter and things like that. But I haven't directly spoiled myself, and I don't care. They could love it. They could hate it. It doesn't matter why Sony is DMCAing them. It's not the right thing to do. It's not what the law says they should be able to do, and that makes me mad.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's
and I love Sony. I'm not an Xbox only type guy. I have all the consoles. I've played every Sony PlayStation. I like a lot of their output. I like a lot of Naughty Dog's output. This isn't about that. This is about a lawyer looking at this and saying that's wrong. Don't do that.
Yeah, I just so much malice, you know. It's I would hate to be one of these YouTubers that's talking about like drama and stuff, but some drama is important. Like, you know, you have the quartering and you and everyone who's bringing attention to issues that are important, you know.
Yeah.
Celebrity gossip and stuff isn't important, but consumer rights and advocacy is. I wish we could just go back to reviewing games on YouTube and talking about stuff like that, but if they did that, then you wouldn't have as much of a step in. So,
hey, I love it. I've been doing this now for a year and a half, and my lovely wife told me when I started this nobody would listen to it. And in all honesty, it was the Easy Allies. It was that sponsorship, which, if your listeners don't know, wound up kind of growing into them asking me questions a dozen or more times. And yeah, so they had a section that Kyle Bossman wound up calling Help Us Out Hoeg, where he would ask a question about things like how Bungie got outside of Activision, or what it means when somebody buys Respawn, like Electronic Arts did. And all these various questions, and they were very well thought of, and so they did more and more of them, and I said, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I could do that kind of more frequently. And then it's been over the course of the last year and a half kind of figuring out exactly what that was and how to do it fast enough. Like, I don't want it to be just kind of sloppy and lazy, but in my day job, I got a lot of stuff to do, right? So I have a lot of clients to help with whatever they're going through, a lot of documents to draft, a lot of negotiations to have. And I really needed to figure out how to do a video in what I usually call farm to table in like 3 or 4 hours and figure out how that would be done. And I also wanted to be reacting to the news of the day. And I think we've gotten there. I'm very happy about it. But yeah, the drama and the stuff that's really important, like Sony using the DMCA in a very aggressive manner, I think that's really useful. I think that's important. But I like just talking about business and law in general, right? So when we started the channel over the summer, there was the issue where Spider-Man got dropped from the MCU and Disney and Sony were fighting about it. I love that. I had 3 or 4 episodes where I talked about that, and I was talking about what we were seeing, because all you would get were these articles from The Hollywood Reporter or even from IGN or GameSpot, because it's just so kind of pop culture oriented. And I would look at them all and I would see what everybody was saying, and I would do these videos and I would say, okay, so this is not real. This is a negotiation. This is what a high stakes negotiation looks like when one side leaves the table to have a leverage position. And so I said, okay, so Spider-Man, expect him back. He will be back at the next window where it makes sense for this leverage to flip. And I had all these videos, and I really enjoyed talking about that. That wasn't drama so much as helping people, hopefully, and this is kind of the mission statement of my channel and Virtual Legality as a series, helping people understand the stories that they are reading anyway, right? That I have all this business and law knowledge, which is great, and I use it for stuff that most people might find boring on a moment-to-moment basis, you know, drafting documents, negotiating identification provisions, stuff that pays the bills and that I enjoy doing, but maybe wouldn't be so great on YouTube. But saying, hey, this is a big deal, this Spider-Man story. People are interested in this, and I have some insight as to what's happening, because I have negotiated, honestly, I've negotiated against these big studios before for my little clients, my little companies, but I have definitely negotiated against them. And yeah, I understand what's happening here. And then when it does happen after the 4th video, you know, it's always nice to have everybody come into your tweets and comment on your videos, say, yeah, you nailed it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's not the hardest thing in the world from somebody with my perspective, but it's nice. It's gratifying to say, yeah, I think I helped at least a few dozen people in the early days of the channel understand what was going on before everybody else did.
Yeah, it's nice to have that back door, right? Because you have IGN would blow things out of proportion, and then you have just any news site would just grab the word Spider-Man and say, "Oh, look, be scared, be scared, be scared." But then they could come to your channel, they could come to some other YouTuber's channel and be like, "Here's what's actually happening. This is..."
That's exactly what happened, because IGN, and I'm trying to remember the specifics here, is they wound up putting up an article that said, "Sorry, fans, Spider-Man's not coming back." And it was a quote from Kevin Feige, I think maybe, or maybe Tom Holland, that said, "Sorry, he's not coming back." And I said, well, it doesn't say anything like that. It says right this second there's not a contract, and that's exactly what you have to say, because there isn't one right this second. That doesn't change anything about what's happening behind the scenes, and I still expect him to be back. And I put that video out there, and that's one of those where it was, I think the title, maybe even the thumbnail is "No IGN, it doesn't say that," or something like that. Sometimes on YouTube you try to get a little crunchy on your thumbnails or on your titling. But yeah, that's really why I started it. I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell, and always I've loved this kind of stuff. So the MCU and video games and this kind of nerdy stuff, where the video game sites and even fellow YouTubers and various other aspects of that, they aren't necessarily getting the business and legal analysis. Some are. You had a little bit of, like, Michael Pachter and analysts come in to talk about the industry. There's some other folks that do that as well. But that's what I felt that I could really do. And to my pleasure, a number of journalists wound up kind of keying on that, and I wound up getting quoted in places like the Washington Post and Variety and
cool.
Game Daily Biz, IGN, PC Gamer, GameSpot. I think Hoeg has appeared in all of those now at this point. And yeah, I like to tell people I give good and fast quotes if you need anything. And if I can help, I will, because I really think it's important to try to help that education aspect if I can. And I'm not God's gift to lawyering. I don't have every answer. But I do think I can understand a little bit more about the specifics about what's going on with some of these big business kind of questions than maybe somebody that's just talking about the actual content of the video games all the time.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about, and I understand what you're saying, but what do you think about these people who, like, because Geeks and Gamers, being generous, it's divisive.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I checked in on the channel a couple times. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, and you commented on one. A disclaimer, I think I defended you here, but which for what it's worth, nothing. They were like, "Oh, so you defend these asshole, and that's your shtick," and I'm like, on Twitter, it's so easy to get lambasted because middle grounds are hard to put into headlines, right? So if you're someone, because what the Fandom Menace is about is, I don't identify with them. I agree with a lot of what they're saying, but they're like, oh, you have forced diversity in a lot of these things, and organic diversity is the way to go. But then someone will just take a snippet of what they say, and then they'll stretch the truth, and they'll be like, oh, I'm advocating for this. They're the opposite side.
Sure.
So what do you think they is? And then even if you just do something like give them legal advice on Twitter, then they bastardize, and it can't even just be like you being neutral.
Disclaimer: I do not give legal advice on Twitter. I comment on legal matters, in case the bar is listening to this.
Okay, I don't mean to misrepresent. I don't mean to misrepresent you or anything.
No, that's one of the fun parts about lawyers. You'll see it. I have a hashtag that I use because it tweets not legal advice. It's essentially the distinction between giving formal legal advice, a client relationship, and just commenting on legal matters. Because ethically, a lawyer can't really give advice about somebody's specific question or circumstance until they kind of talk with them and understand the specifics of what they're going through. Mm-hmm. Right? So I can talk about something in general about, say, the Ubisoft terms of service or whatever, but I can't talk about and I get a lot of DMs now about this, oh, my YouTube channel is doing this, blah, 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 blah. And I have to say, well, look, I can't answer that in this space. You can engage me. You could hire me. That doesn't necessarily make sense for this kind of level of problem. And I can give you kind of generalized commentary on what's happening here. But I have to be very careful about that. And you see the disclaimer at the end of Virtual Legalities that say, hey, if you got a question, go hire a lawyer. But that's an important thing.
That reminds me of how whenever I give my friends advice, every time I'm done giving them advice, I say, I don't know, though, at the end, just so they can never say that I ruined their life because I...
Yeah, that's lawyers for you, right? I think the classic answer to why everybody hates lawyers is that if you ask them any kind of difficult question, they say, well, maybe. Maybe. Or on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, completely the opposite.
There's another pretty cool lawyer on YouTube though. You watch him?
Which?
Legal Eagle.
Yeah, Legal Eagle and I have had a couple of interactions now.
Oh, cool.
You might see something come out of that in the near future. I would say. I don't want to give anything away there. He actually put something out last fall. I don't know if you remember this, but YouTube was going through this whole kind of COPPA controversy.
Yeah.
And I wound up growing my channel a lot because I wound up talking about it and how the Federal Trade Commission was stretching the statute to try to hit YouTubers rather than YouTube itself, et cetera, et cetera. And Legal Eagle did a video in the middle of all that, to be frank, got a few things minutely wrong on what was happening with respect to COPPA and the regulations. And so I did a video called Legal Eagle is wrong about some of COPPA. And so he commented on that, and then he started DMing me, and we followed each other, and we've chatted a bunch about that. He's actually very funny. I tweeted out, I don't know whether it was a couple of weeks ago or maybe even longer. In quarantine, the days just blend together. But he said something along the lines of, he had a video out there, and I said, I like this one. This was good. I recommend it. I forwarded it. I retweeted it. And he responded, he said, oh, thank God I couldn't take another Hoeg Law takedown. And it's like, yeah, well, I try to be friendly, but, if I think you're wrong, I'll let you know.
Yeah, it's not even like a mean or nice thing. It's just, he was wrong or incorrect.
No, and I'm opposed to all kind of ad hominems. If you come onto my channel, that's one of the things I say, is that you'll never hear an ad hominem. You'll never hear a personal attack in my space. I don't think that contributes to the discourse. I understand why it happens on social media, and I'm even empathetic in certain places, not so much in others. But you won't see that. I don't think that's useful to getting my point across. I don't really think that's useful to helping make somebody understand how they might be wrong. So, in the last couple of days on this Ubisoft thing, you might have seen this, but Upper Echelon Gamers put out a video that said, Ubisoft owns your soul. And they had read this new Terms of Service section to be a little bit more broad than what it actually said. And so, more than a dozen people contacted me within an hour, so good for him. He's got a lot of pull.
He does, yeah.
But I looked at it, and I said, oh, no, he got it wrong. And so I have a channel. I was actually in the middle of something else, and I said, no, I really should put a corrective out there. I should just do a quick virtual legality because this is important. Yeah. And in that video, I said, look, I am thrilled that anybody as big and has 500,000 subscribers is looking at these kinds of issues. I think it's important to understand what happens in a Terms of Service document. But he got this wrong. And let me tell you why it's not what he thinks it is. And I DM'd him at the same time. I said, look, I did this. I want you to know I think it's a good thing that you went into this. And we started DMing each other as well. And in yesterday's video that he put up, he actually acknowledged that he was mistaken, and he sent people over to the channel. I think that is the better way to have that conversation. Is not just like, oh, look at this guy over here thinking he's a lawyer. No, I'm thrilled that you're reading these things. More people should. However, I can read them just a little bit better, and so here's why you don't need to hit the eject button on Ubisoft just yet.
Yeah, and I don't blame Chris for being scared about that. I don't blame him for because just all of this malicious shit with Blizzard and just lots of other things. I don't blame, and with how poorly written it was, which you concede that it was poorly written.
Oh no, absolutely.
Yes,
I think the subtitle to that thumbnail was they could have been more clear about everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a good written document. It isn't.
Yeah, definitely. I would not put it past a lot of these AAA developers at this point to do some of the stuff that Chris thinks that they were doing in that Terms of Service. It's getting increasingly hard. Let's Play footage was what people always used instead of movie footage because you get significantly less takedowns.
Is that why? I had noticed, I have to be honest, I haven't been in the YouTube space as much as others, and I really only started following a lot of, I don't know what you would call it, YouTube commenters when The Last Jedi came out, right? So my little law firm had started just maybe a year and a half before that, and I wound up that movie made me so mad. I wound up putting a blog post on my law firm blog called, I can't even remember what it was. It was The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker, and Heroism in the Age of Trump. and talking about how essentially they'd killed what Star Wars was by deconstructing it, and there's places for that. But anyway, this article of mine wound up going a little bit viral, like hundreds of thousands of views, way viral, more viral than anything I'd written on the space before. But in that, it wound up getting sent to various places around the internet that I just didn't know of, right? So I'm an older guy. I have a law degree. I've been practicing for more than 15 years. You can do the math on that. But I found myself in places like Reddit and Tumblr and various forums I had never heard of, and talking to people on the ForceNet, which is like a Star Wars only fan forum, which has a lot of cool people on it. And all these people were commenting on the article, and then that got like sent over to, or I was sent over to a guy by the name of Mauler.
I was just about to predict that, yeah.
Yeah, who does these Last Jedi videos. And I was really fascinated by the whole concept of, so this is whatever it is, it's early 2018. I was really fascinated with the concept of taking something like this and doing a postmortem on something that you love and just analyzing it to death. And I just thought it was really, really interesting. And so it was that, along with Help Us Out, Hoeg, along with the fact I was on the radio at the time. And I said, okay, I think I can do that kind of thing. And what does that look like? So the first thing I did, I think the first thing you'll see on the channel is I took another essay that I had written for like Infinity War, and I made it a video. I practiced cutting it. And so you'll see in May of 2018 me kind of messing with what video can do. Yeah. And then I go dark for a while, and then Virtual Legality starts in November. So that's really, it's so funny to think of, but like Kyle Bossman, The Last Jedi, Mauler, and some radio gigs that I had combined to form Virtual Legality.
Yeah, it's video essays were a great thing to discover. It's another back door, like was mentioned earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love it. I think it's really interesting. There are a lot of dumb people out there, like there are in any walk of life, but there are a lot of really smart and interesting people. And one thing that I really like, and I do recommend this to folks, and I don't know whether they do this themselves, I actually kind of like watching a few commenters that I know are going to be essentially diametrically opposed to what I like in a narrative or a video game or what have you, because I think that's illuminating. I think that's very interesting to go, okay, that what you just said, I'm exactly the opposite of. So I now kind of understand your worldview and what it is that you like about this thing that I definitely don't. Yeah. And I find that to be very helpful. I like that. I like that process.
And it's also just echo chambers aren't healthy for the mind. They aren't. When people just start agreeing over and over, and it just gets fed into each other. Whereas if you purposely find the person who disagrees on a fundamental level, you could get to new places of thought that you might not have if you were just agreeing with someone for... Yeah, no,
I love it. I mean, and as I said, I like following Mauler's stuff now, and he doesn't agree with me, and I don't agree with him on and everything. But like one of the things he said, he'd had a whole long section where he was talking about another YouTuber by the name of, I think it was H Bomber guy, who I'd never heard of. And I went and looked at that video because Mauler clearly was upset at him and didn't like what he had to say. And I thought it was fascinating to just take the same kind of material and look at it from the entirely opposite direction. And I will tell you, I don't think anybody that isn't Mauler or H Bomber guy agrees 100% with either of their stuff. There's at least little things you can take out of each side of that equation. And so I like that process. I've always liked that kind of process.
Yeah. Lots of people give Mauler crap over how long his videos are. And they're like,
it's good to fall asleep to if you need to, yeah.
it's like if you need 3 hours to explain something, then you can't even. I'm like, I don't know. As long as the facts add up, as long as it's structurally sound and it makes sense, why not?
Well, somebody came into one of my legal videos and said "long man bad," and I think that's a Mauler reference.
It is.
So I said, hey, there you go. All right. And you know, some of the videos on my channel are 2 or 3 hours long because, in all honesty, going through a statute that is being evaluated in a court case, and then the other things that they are referencing in that court case, as well as my thoughts on the statute, the court case, and the references, is just something that takes a while.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a lengthy video. For me,
no, not if it's well done and it's enjoyable. Like I said, I don't agree with everything he says. I do think some of his stuff is nitpicky, but I found him hating The Last Jedi, and it might be my least favorite movie of all time, so it was enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I understand because I hated where I can relate the most. I'm not a huge Star Wars guy, but I was a huge Game of Thrones fan, so I was burned on
Oh,
season 8, just like a lot of other people. And
oh.
and
Were you watching me? Did you check out my postmortems of that series? Because I think you can watch me descend into madness, because I did all 6 episodes.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, oh yeah, no, I'll watch them. I'll definitely watch them. I haven't. I've seen the Blizzard of Backlash series and a handful of
Yeah.
others, but
Yeah, no, you can watch my Game of Thrones postmortems. The stuff I really am into and I like, I do impressions of if I don't finish them, or postmortems if I do. So I did a postmortem of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I did postmortem of Game of Thrones, which I thought would be better than it was. Yeah, I jokingly tell people between episode 1, where I originally say, "Uh-oh, I'm not sure about this," to episode 6, I think it's like watching me go through some kind of Cthulhu-esque experience.
yeah, it's there will be like a burning hole in my heart for season 8 for as long as I
Yeah.
can remember. But
Well, because George isn't going to finish the books.
yeah, I doubt he will. I really hope he does. But I see these people on Twitter, and they, understandably, they're complaining about the sequel series. But I also think there's a certain point where it's like, I think the Fandom Menace has more to offer than just complaining about the sequel series. I think at some
Now, the
point we have
Phantom
to
Menace,
move
based
on.
on their name, and I don't know this. This is like the Geeks and Gamers. These are the people that really hate the Disney sequel
Yeah.
trilogy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't want to misrepresent anything, but the consensus I came away with is they don't like forced politics in their Star Wars, which I understand.
Yeah.
That, of course, diverse casting is fine, but when it is taking precedence over the story, I do think it becomes a problem. They also
Yeah, well, I think like Canto Bite is just artificial. That kind of thing is, the artificiality is what hurts it, not the message. I can watch a
exactly.
message from any side of the spectrum that you want if it's not artificial to the universe.
Yeah, as long as if your story has an agenda, make sure it's told well, and you could get people who wouldn't otherwise normally agree to that agenda. Maybe they'll
Sure.
get some leeway. Maybe they'll understand where you're coming from. in
Well,
some
I
sense.
jokingly tell people Final Fantasy VII is one of my favorite games of all time. I'm a corporate lawyer, and it's essentially about evil corporations destroying the earth. It is what it is.
Yeah, people love that one. But
Yeah.
no, I think it's time to I guess it's harder because Star Wars stuff is constantly coming out, but I think it might be time to move a little bit farther away from just being sad the sequel series happened so much. I understand.
Well, yeah, it's taken me. It took me at least a solid year to get over Last Jedi. So
Yeah.
But I agree. If that's what they continue to talk about, maybe there's other stuff. Certainly, Game of Thrones doing what it did. I'm not super thrilled with Star Trek. A lot of the stuff from my youth, maybe I'm not so keen to revisit anymore. But
There is a show.
it is what it is.
There is a show that is out that recently ended its second to last season that
Oh yeah.
you probably know a lot about. You know the accuracy of it. It's a prequel to Breaking Bad.
Oh, Better Call Saul. Yeah, so I got to give you. So I've watched the first 2 seasons of Better Call Saul, maybe the first 3, and I'll tell you 2 things. 1, absolutely tremendous. I absolutely love it. 2, I got to tell you, it hits a little close to home for
Yeah.
a small law firm trying to rustle up clients, do good work, not commit crimes per se, but certainly some of those early things where he's in the back of the nail salon and all these different things, as well as the female character whose name I forget,
Kim
being at
Larsa.
the big Kim, yeah, being at the big law firm, which is also my experience,
Mhm.
right? So I was at Big Law, Midwest Big Law at least, for 13 years. So I know that, and they hit that note really well. And then I've also been Saul Goodman starting up a solo practice after leaving Big Law and dealing with that and what that looks like. So I will tell you, certainly in the early days where we were still trying to figure out how to get clients at Hoeg Law and make sure that we could live and keep the lights on and feed the family, I watched those episodes, and it was always with a little bit more cringe than maybe the person sitting next to me.
I've heard from Legal Eagle that it's astoundingly accurate to a lot
Yeah,
of
the
the
only
rules.
thing, the only criticism I would levy at it at all, and I think this is just economy of television, is that the legal practice is such that you have a speciality. It is a very specialized kind of field. Litigators aren't transactional attorneys. Transactional attorneys know mergers, but they don't necessarily know tax. these various kinds of things happen. And for the economy of television, just watching a season or two of that, most of the lawyers do everything at all times, right? They know how to do a class action lawsuit about this. They know how to do a formation over here and handle a bank financing, which is a very regulated legal industry, et cetera, et cetera.
So you're saying that in real life, lots of these things that they're doing in Better Call Saul are specialty things that would require different people, but
right.
Suspiciously, each character in the show knows how to do everything, it seems.
Or figures it out. You know, like one of the things I really like about the character trait of Saul or Jimmy is he clearly learns things, right? You see him with books occasionally and figuring out how to handle a situation, which is a great thing for a lawyer to have. But yeah, Kim in particular, her plot line is, I'm an associate at a big law firm and I can do anything you ask of me, which really isn't necessarily the way it works.
Yeah, you get great insights through the characters and different things. Like from Chuck's point of view, you have a view at the AAA corporate kind of fancy buildings lawyer thing, and then with Jimmy, you get the startup and the shadier side of it, and then you have Kim who's being dragged into Jimmy's shenanigans because she loves him and stuff. And
and you see her being an associate, and one of the things I really remember from that early plot line is she winds up like calling everybody that she ever had cocktails with in order to try to bring a bank in.
Oh yeah, when she's trying to make all that's how I feel when I'm reaching out to people for podcasts. Like she's just networking like crazy. I love it.
Yeah, no, and it's cool. And then you look at it and it's like, well, but she's on the class action litigation team, but she's now it's great. It doesn't bug me. It's just one of those things where I watch it and I go, that wouldn't necessarily be the same person. Or if it was, you'd have to show them really scrambling to figure out their new area of law because there's just so much to go into it. Yeah. One of the things that happens to me, and one of the things I was really tried to address in the marketing for Hoeg Law is, it's the Hoeg Law business law firm. We do transactions. We help companies form, fund, and exit. But you come to me with your business dispute. You come to me with your contract breach, and I say, okay, I know some litigators that can help you with that. But you need somebody that goes to court. I haven't been to court since law school. So that's a difference in the legal practice. That's a difference in the two areas.
Yeah, it's astounding how close it gets, though, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it's great. It's a great show. I think the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul team is one of my favorite that's currently working in television. They get plots right. They know how to make the pieces work, and they do it with good characters. They're some of the best and some of my favorites.
Have you seen El Camino?
I have seen El Camino. I thought it was a perfectly fine send-off. It was like...
it's going to be hard to topple that last episode of Breaking Bad. You can never top that. It was as good as it could have been, I think.
It reminded me of like the Citadel DLC from Mass Effect 3. Like, it's just hey, you remember all these folks? And they're going to party out of here.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we had a perfect send-off, but let's get together one last time and have some fun. And
let's get Jesse out of here so he can go be on a terrible season of Westworld.
Yeah, and I think as much as I love Better Call Saul, I feel like sometimes Mike doesn't fit enough. I feel like Mike is mostly there so that we can have more Breaking Bad style moments, and I love that. Yeah. They are very well directed. They interweave every now and again, but I can't shake the feeling that sometimes I'm watching two different shows that are half an hour and just stapled together.
Sure. Yeah. Well, he's a great actor, and he has fun with being that kind of person. Oh, yeah. So I don't begrudge him that.
Yeah, and they do interweave without spoiling anything. The storylines do.
Yeah, I'm a couple seasons back, but I'm sure it's great.
Yeah, the storylines do interweave more later on, so that probably justifies Mike's involvement more as it goes.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie 12 Angry Men?
Oh, sure. Not only have I seen the movie 12 Angry Men, I performed in 12 Angry Men in high school. Yeah, I was juror number 6.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That is you're talking about the black and white one, right? Not the 1997 one. I'm sure they're both good.
I don't think I've seen a 1997 one. I don't know that I knew that they did one.
It's incredible how well that movie has aged. It's all performance. It's just one room, just 12 guys talking, coming to conclusions. They don't get any new evidence. No new evidence happens while they're in that room. It's just them mulling things over in their head and reaching different conclusions.
Yeah, and proving juror number 8 is a racist. It's all good time.
Oh yeah, you don't even find out their names until the end. Only 2 of them.
No, it's a great. I've always loved that kind of approach, especially if you have good actors. You obviously need good actors. I can't claim to have been one in high school, but I enjoyed doing it. And I've always loved that. One of my favorite older movies of that stripe was I really loved Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. I don't know if you've seen that movie,
I have not.
but it's essentially one set and two guys dealing with the aftermath of a murder and how to deal with a party that happens right after it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great movie. I highly recommend it. If you like 12 Angry Men, if you like that approach to essentially one room and people dealing, it's that kind of approach. So I do recommend it. It's one of my favorites.
I will definitely consider it, yeah. Because I think when a movie buckles down, or if any story buckles down and just focuses on one thing, one scene, one idea, and they do that for their entire runtime, you get some cool, subtle angles that you wouldn't get from a more overarching story, like, something in Marvel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's also the kind of rubric that the Netflix and other streaming series of the world are using as well, which is, to some extent, movies feel a little short now because we're used to kind of getting a 7-hour movie, give or take, that can go into these character studies and have these subtleties, and we can enjoy watching them grow in a more organic fashion, whereas you watch a movie, and unless it's perfectly done, and there are certainly directors and writers that can do that, you wind up feeling like you're missing things. It's going too fast, because I think, at least in my experience, I've been trained to kind of have a little bit longer form story told to me.
Yeah. Season 8 of Game of Thrones, it felt long because it was bad, but it also felt long because every episode of that was a movie. They had like hour and a half. You know what Season 8 felt like is what Season 8 felt like is the directors got a booty call and they wanted to finish it up really fast so they could go satisfy that call. And so like, oh crap, we don't care how bad it is. Let's just get it out right now.
Well, the joke on them is that they were going to do that for Star Wars, right?
And then that fell through.
And then they quote unquote quit. But I think everybody was mutually in agreement that they weren't a good fit for Star Wars after the
yes.
full experiment.
That's weird that I never even thought of that. They were just like, Season 8, and now you guys get to come over to Star Wars, and people are already mad about us doing sequel movies. Yeah, no, we'll let you stay over there. You don't.
Yeah, no, you get the Rian Johnson hit, then you get the Rise of Skywalker hit, and then you say, oh, we're going to bring in D&D. Nah.
An all-star team. I will always be somewhat thankful to Rian Johnson. He directed the second to last episode of Breaking Bad, Ozymandias.
Sure, Ozymandias, yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic. He's just, that unpredictable and character study kind of thing does not work with Star Wars. Star Wars is more of a fairy tale where it's like, it's upbeat, it's hopeful. You can... Yeah.
Hey, I like Knives Out. I thought he did a great job with it.
I like Knives Out as well. That was a pretty fun movie.
And it's just a shame. I mean, one of the tweets I wound up having with somebody, Twitter's a crazy place. I think it was James Mangold, of all people, when he was talking about doing the Boba Fett movie, was he was defending Last Jedi and saying, people should be able to do what they want in the universe because otherwise no directors or writers are going to want to play in it. And I basically tweeted out to him, I said, yeah, absolutely, but probably not in what we are calling episode 8 out of 9. Yeah. And he said, yes, true. Yeah. And that wound up, and because Twitter is Twitter, that wound up getting published in like 16 newspapers. Him saying that framework, and it was just, that's the case. Like the essay that I wrote was, this deconstruction could actually be considered interesting if it were off to the side and it was an essay about the nature of Star Wars and heroism and idol worship or whatever.
Yeah, no, Star Wars is a giant, vast universe, and it's fine to look at The Mandalorian. Mandalorian is more about the criminal underbelly of the Star Wars universe. It is perfectly fine to explore different tones and ideas and kinds of characters, but if it's part of the mainline series, that's probably not the best time to experiment. And I'm totally for, risking and doing things that look at the new God of War. That was completely different than the previous ones, and I think that was a risk that paid off. But it did not with The Last Jedi. I think the best thing to come out of The Last Jedi is I thought that planet with the salt was kind of cool. That was my favorite thing. That'll be a fun map.
That's absolutely true. When they got the license and they said they're going to do all these movies, they're going to have all these anthologies, stories, I thought, yeah, let's have a comedy of manners on Alderaan. Let's have an anime movie that explores cybernetics in the underworld of Coruscant. Let's do all these various things. But no, they just wound up making Solo and Rogue One and the sequels. And, you know, I like Rogue One enough, and certainly I like the space battle in it, but they didn't really explore that. And then you've got things like The Mandalorian that are happening, and that's exciting because it's Star Wars, yes, but it's newish. And I have to tell you, I have to sit here and say, I liked The Mandalorian's first episode, and then it kind of had a long tail trail off for me, such that I haven't finished that series. I haven't watched the last couple of episodes of it.
I think I think Mandalorian and Fallen Order are the two things that got me a little bit excited about Star Wars again, even as not a giant Star Wars fan. At the same time. Yeah, it was fun to be excited about Star Wars again, especially after, you know, seeing franchises ruined again, like, you know, Game of Thrones, which I'm not sure what your least favorite part about the season 8 is, but from Jamie was my favorite character, and just seeing him do this.
Oh, they did Jamie so dirty. That's not fair. If he's your favorite character, that was wrong. Yeah. I was not as invested in Jamie. He wasn't my favorite character, but in that scene where he's saying goodbye to Brienne, I was saying, oh no, this. He clearly understands he has to go kill Cersei. Like, he couldn't possibly be going back to Cersei.
Yeah.
And then, like, they frame it all that way. I was like, oh no, what are you talking about? Yeah. What are you talking about?
I thought it was the same thing as like Tyrion and Shay, where he purposely tells her off so that she doesn't feel bad before he does the thing.
Exactly. He knows he's going to have to die. It's going to be the brother killing the sister, but he's got to do it. And like, no. And I was like, that is just tone deaf. Like, you're just dead on wrong. Now, that's just a small bit of what's tone deaf about episodes 5 and 6. So it gets kind of buried under bricks, you might say, from the other things that are happening.
Do you think, tough question, you think Last Jedi is worse than Season 8 of Game of Thrones? And don't just say
I think Last Jedi did more damage. I think Star Wars was essentially a property that had proven that it was versatile, that it could support 60 video games in 10 years, that it could have all these comics, all this merchandising. People would still dress up as Jedi 40 years after its release. And The Last Jedi coming out, I described it to the folks that talk to me about these kinds of things, was a light switch. Like, I had loved Star Wars. I could still show you, if I had a camera right here, that I could still see 15 or 16 Star Wars things in my home work office. Mm-hmm. And it was essentially like, oh, Star Wars is just media created by a business, and I could go see it or not. Okay. I mean, it was literally that kind of abrupt, that, oh, no, none of this. Once you don't have a plan, once you aren't figuring out what it is, once you don't fundamentally understand what the nature of the dark side and the Force and Star Wars is and meant to people, then, yeah. People say on the internet, oh, it's not my canon, or things along those lines, and we make fun of them, or we say, oh, whatever, but it's the truth. I was on the ForceNet or whatever, and I said, well, look, it's intellectual property. I can separate myself from this as a lawyer and say, you know, just because Disney had the $4 billion to pony up doesn't make their Star Wars any better than this guy that's making a YouTube video about Darth Vader's history. It just means they had the $4 billion. So you can take it, you can leave it, you can do whatever you want with it. Yes, as the guy that is at the Lucasfilm Story Group said, it's not real. We can understand that. It's not real. But to the extent a story is meaningful, that it makes us feel things, whether that's hope or despair or what have you, it has to have a consistency of reality. And if you break that, we can say, no, that part that breaks it, that's not my Star Wars.
Yeah. What's funny is anything that has an expanded universe big enough will have stupid stuff. So, like, you know, as even before the Disney canon, I have a friend who's really versed in Star Wars, and he said, oh, yeah, no, the old expanded universe was full of dumb shit also. Like, Luke went to the dark side for a bit, and...
Sure, and he fought a clone of Palpatine.
Yeah, Palpatine, like, kept going into different bodies, and it was just really, really weird. But what's great about Star Wars is it's so big. You could go to the story you love. You know, I could go to Fallen Order. I could go to the animated series that was by the Samurai Jack guys, which I love the fight scenes in that are really good.
The original Clone Wars, before the Clone Wars. Yeah.
Those are so good. And the Grievous chasing the Chancellor down the hallway, and the
that was the first time we saw Grievous, if I remember correctly. That was before the release in 2005.
Oh, really? Huh. Yeah, and they explain...
I think that finished up.
And they explained his cough.
Yeah, I think that was before the movie came out.
Yeah, they explain his cough because right before he gets on the ship at the end, Mace Windu force chokes his heart, and it's like, oh, so that's why he coughs in episode three. Episode three is like the watchable part of the prequels. You could tell when you were seeing Order 66, like, okay, George Lucas has been wanting to tell this for a while. You know, it's plagued by some of Anakin's wooden acting and stuff like that, but I think there's a lot to love as well.
Oh, Natalie Portman doesn't get out of this either.
No, 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 no. It's only
Them with the hairbrush is maybe the worst scene in history.
There's some stuff you see in episode 2, 3, and even episode 1 where it's like, Jesus, you left that in? Why the fuck did you leave that in? The romance dialogue, I wanted to kill myself.
Well, you know, it's very funny because I've been defending the prequels for most of my adult life. And what I usually defend them with, and I actually did a couple of papers on this to get my economics degree, if you can believe it. I talk about Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and then the Rise of Skywalker, although that isn't as important to this particular kind of thesis. I talk about the fall of democracy and that George is a very, very good idea man. And all of that is what the prequels are about. And yes, Darth Vader and Anakin and everything else and kind of the fall of a chosen one. But the actual showing of what a galactic democracy would do, a republic, and become an empire and how that kind of happens is so on point. And the through line of the prequels is a story, which I didn't know was something that was so hard to achieve. But then you compare it to the sequels, and people say, well, the sequels are better. I say, well, look, I can acknowledge that the sequels have more organic acting. They have more spatial directing. They have maybe better visual effects, but, you know, I give some leeway. Certainly, I think Phantom Menace looks great today. But the actual plotline, the story that George wanted to tell in the prequels, I think was excellent. It just was the execution, the dialogue, the specifics, his direction in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was a problem. And I had long hoped that when they bought the Star Wars property, it would be George Lucas as ideas, it would be some good, competent writer. I liked Michael Arndt. I was happy with him as making the script off of George's treatments and ideas and some really good, flashy director. I ideally would have had Ryan Coogler do it, but I would be fine with JJ or Rian Johnson as director. But
well, I understand
that's not what we came out.
I understand the overarching story being a good idea, and I understand. And you had said what I thought was that the execution was bad. I understand that, but I think that execution is everything. So there are so many bad movies and bad stories where the phrase gets thrown around a lot. Oh, that had a lot of potential, but they messed it up. And my thought process is, well, technically everything, you know, has a lot of potential. There's some show synopsis where if someone read it to you on paper, you'd be like, oh, that would never work. That would be a stupid plot. But then they do it right out of execution. I love the fight scenes in the prequels. I love episode 3 and some of the animated series. I just wish we got more time to see the vulnerability in the characters and stuff. Like, my favorite scene in all of Star Wars is Luke talking to his dad right before they go on the Death Star in episode 6. You get to see Darth Vader lower his guard for a bit, and they have a moment, even though they're on such opposite
on the
ends
bridge.
of this war.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
Yeah, and you never really get to slow down with Qui-Gon Jinn. You never get to slow down with young Obi-Wan. You never really get to see them open up.
I think that's entirely fair.
Yeah, I wish there was a fan dub that they dubbed over Anakin, and they like lip synced it perfectly somehow.
Well, it's funny. I was watching the scene. I can't remember why the other day of them looking out the windows. You know, Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen looking out the windows as everything happens in Revenge of the Sith. And I was thinking, you know, I know why he was cast. Like, he looks dead on. He's the handsome heartthrob Anakin.
Oh, yeah.
And he looks the part perfectly.
Yeah, you see his eyes when he has the hood on and he's like going to kill the younglings. He looks perfect. I just wish he didn't open his mouth.
He looks perfect. And it's like, I understand, but yeah, he doesn't pull it off. However, it seems more on George than anybody else because Natalie Portman has been better in everything else she's ever done. Obviously, Liam Neeson basically survives Phantom Menace because he just Liam Neeson's all over it. And it's kind of similarly with Ewan McGregor. He kind of survives as well. But
he survives in the expanded universe?
Well, I mean, I think he survives in terms of surviving George's direction.
Okay. And he's also a Force ghost a lot, so there's that.
But you know, I like the prequels. I'm a defender of the prequels.
Yeah, and another great thing the prequel spawned, Darth Maul. He was in the animated series that ended recently. He was so cool they couldn't kill him off. They brought him back in the comics. He had like the droid legs, the droid hind
Oh
legs,
yeah,
and he found Obi-Wan on Tatooine, and they had a fight for a bit. I was like, that's so cool. And he's like,
very weird appearance in Solo.
oh yeah, yeah. And I was like, oh wow, they got a weird actor for him. And like, no, that's the same actor. I'm like, oh, how come he looks different? He's older.
It's
Oh.
been a few years.
Yeah, he's. I think he did all his own fights, didn't he?
Yeah, he that was what he did. I mean, I think his voice is actually dubbed in both Solo and Phantom Menace.
Wow. Yeah, no, he was just too cool to kill off. That's why I'm glad they just cut him in half and had him go down the hole, because then they could do basically whatever they wanted. Whereas,
Well, you know, as we've been told, no one's ever really gone in Star Wars, right?
yeah, like, I mean, that's kind of what was relieving about El Camino, is when they just said, okay, you know, he's actually. I know they cut away at the last clip of the last episode of Breaking Bad, but he's actually gone. He's don't you know, we'll do flashbacks for all these characters and get the actors back in for one last hurrah, but don't yeah, no, it's not. We're not going to do. He's not going to come back as a robot or anything. Well, that would be pretty cool though.
Well, listen, I am very thankful for you having me on. I have to go, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for taking the time to come here, man.
Well, I was happy to do it. Yeah, no, you never know if you don't ask, and I'm very happy that you did.
But yeah, no, keep championing the consumer on Twitter. I'm not. It must be hard to balance being a corporate lawyer and consumer rights person. No.
Well, I try very hard to use illuminating language and to not be too remotely political on these spaces, and yet, you know, Twitter and YouTube call me all sorts of names. It is what it is.
Oh yeah, yeah. No matter what happens. But yeah, no. Thanks for coming on. Keep up the good fight on Twitter. Keep making videos. Keep protecting yourself. And yeah, no. I'll see you around, man.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.